Welcome to Swimming with Allocators,
the VC podcast from the LP perspective,
with your hosts, Alexa Benz
and Ernest Sweat. You ready? Let's dive in.
Welcome back to Swimming with Allocators. Today, Alexa and I sat down with Marcia Mitchell of Mesa Lane Capital. We sat down and spoke about one of the biggest questions in venture right now. Are we truly saturated with emerging managers? Or are we still missing where great talent actually lives? Marcia brings a sharp perspective shaped by her time at FF Venture Capital, New York Ventures, and now Mesa Lane, where she helps back and build early stage fund managers. We dig into what responsible capital allocation really means, how Mesa Lane is trying to be more than just another fund of funds, and how parenting has changed the way she thinks about focus, energy, and investing in people. Here's our conversation with Marcia Mitchell. Marcia, so glad to have you today. I want to jump in with just learning more about your story and how you got to Mesa Lane. So,
great. Well, first of all, thank you both so much for having me on. It's a real pleasure to turn sort of what's becoming like a long-term, friendship into an actual conversation that we can sort of show to other people. Because I always come out of conversations with you having learned a lot, laughed a lot, and further enriched by speaking with you. So I'm really excited to continue that. But I started my career in venture. I like to talk about how my dad is an electrical engineer by training, and my mom is a psychotherapist. So what better child to birth from that union than a venture capitalist who ends up being sort of like an engineer therapist in a way. And I really take that role. I'm sort of honored to be in that position because I really do love interacting with people who are have a deep education in technology and are able to sort of articulate and materialize that technology in front of our very eyes. And then, of course, being a supportive partner to the growth of a company, whether it's a founder company or a GP company, is, my job at this point. But I started at my career at FFVC, FF Venture Capital. I had come out of a master's program at RPI up here in upstate New York. And I'd sort of thought I was going to start a startup and have a platform for kids on the autism spectrum where they would learn how to interpret and display their own emotions given prompts on a screen. And I have people in my family who are on the spectrum, and that was really dear to my heart. But I realized quickly that is a long road. There were a lot of people sort of already doing some of that. And with my financial background and sort of acumen on that side, I'd be much better off helping people by being on the investor side. So I, got hooked up with the FFVC crew by Jenny Fielding, actually, and Lorene Pendleton, who happen to be pretty good friends, and were the first female VCs that I really got to sit down and have coffees with and tell them that, I want to be a VC, and they sort of put me through my paces, and then sort of threw me on the front door steps of FF Venture Capital, and I got a job as a partner operations manager, which was an amazing residency program, I like to call it, for venture. I was sort of right hand to one of the partners there, and I helped them do everything from, work with founders, find new deals, sit on boards as a proxy, due diligence, obviously, daily. And I spent 4 years there really sort of learning the craft. I then went on to work for New York Ventures. Sort of during the pandemic, I moved back upstate, closer to family and closer to home. And an opportunity came across my desk to work in the public sector and for the state of New York. And I just thought that was such an interesting way to use the skill set and use my experience. They were standing up several new funds, given an allocation from the federal government for investing in pre-seed deals, to continue their investment in direct investments across seed to Series D, to stand up an $100 million emerging manager fund of funds program, and also a community and regional partner fund program, which is focused on accelerators and incubators across the state.
So there's a question right now of are we capped out on emerging managers? And does it work in venture? So I think the question I have for you is, why emerging manager programs today when it's a very different market than it was in 2000, right?
That is a great question. Yeah, 2000 and even 2020. The market has shifted so many times and so gravely in some senses. That's a really good question. I think, the success of several seed focused firms has drawn a lot of attention to to this industry, right? So people who I have conversations with several funds weekly, and I've spoken to almost 500 now, which you talk to other like emerging manager fund of funds, like that's nothing. But for us, that's a lot, like in the 12 months. And what I'm noticing, obviously, is more and more people coming from non-traditional backgrounds into the emerging manager space and into seed investing. And a lot of them, there's still a lot of novelty to be had from their perspectives. So, like, I'm of two minds. I'm of one mind that, like, there's, ex tech founders who are becoming investors, and whatever they're bringing to the fore and their strategy is can range from, like I said, A to Z. And then there's also people who you wouldn't expect to starting a fund, whether it's celebrities or it's previous executives who weren't tech leaders but have an inside baseball knowledge.
Your concern that you're frittering it away, is that because of the asset class? Is your concern around how difficult it is to get alpha? Or I'm curious, like just double tapping on
Yeah, like
what
when
frittering.
it, like, are there hyped industries that are taking up the lion's share of the capital when there's other industries that could be potentially like paradigm shifting for certain technologies that would help humanity? Or are there certain areas or investors who are not getting funded because so much energy is being put into other buckets? It's really more about, is the allocation of capital responsible right now, or is it tried and true and tested, and this is a path we're going down, and this has worked before, so it's obviously going to work in the future, or is it really thoughtful? And I don't think
Is there an area, is there an area you think that would be more responsible, or that you want to look that others aren't necessarily looking?
That's another really good question. I mean, obviously, like, I'm gonna put a plug in for my community. Like, obviously, there's been a very sad dearth of investment in people that look like me. And you can call that, you can, characterize that however you want to. It still exists. And the facts also exist that companies and funds that are run by people that look like me happen to be very successful. So I feel like there's an obvious misalignment between the understanding of the potential and the actual investment in that space. So that's an easy one for me to identify from my own personal experience. But I think also, like, like I was speaking about technologies for child health improvement, food distribution, disaster preparedness, even like regulatory, like smoothness, let's call it. There's been some attempts in our current administration to make the machine of government work better, and that's there's been an interesting approach so far, but I think there could be ways to use technology and efficiency to improve that even further and look to the future of how we can sort of operate as a country and as humans on this earth, whether it's sustainability, climate change. I'm very curious and open to learning more about those areas, and we're actively taking conversations with funds in those spaces. So I would, look to those areas, I think, to invest in the future.
How, kind of on that train of thought, how is your experience working in the public sector as an allocator? How has that shaped you as just like how you viewed opportunities as well as when underwriting fund managers?
Yeah, I think obviously working in the public sector, there's far more stakeholders in the room, or maybe not in the room or in the building, than I was used to previously. Like some of these checks that we wrote at FF Venture Capital, it's a small group of people that get to make that decision. And it's sometimes, often easier to get those decisions made, whether it's yay or nay. So the process of getting decisions through certainly taught me patience, and I think a little bit more, or just, increased focus. You have to think more holistically than simply transactionally, because obviously the state has the money to, or public, entity has the money to make these investments. It's not necessarily about scarcity at that point, but it's about, not cutting corners and making sure the decision is defensible, not only to your like colleagues at your level, but to, higher offices in the state or in the government. And that process, I think, brings a stringency to my due diligence now, which, I had it before in terms of technology diligence, but in terms of a holistic look at the investment, that's definitely been honed. It also taught me that, like, innovation doesn't only exist in a specific zip code. And you kind of need to make sure that you're looking at other places where intellect or maybe concentrated, or there's value outside of the traditional paths that we've been looking at over this long haul.
Over our journey of interviewing a ton of LPs, and particularly fund of funds, on the record and off the record, we've heard a lot about fund of funds having a tough go at it right now, as well in fundraising, as well as kind of similarly to emerging managers. Could you speak to what you feel is differentiated in the model that Mesa Lane is providing?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. So we really think of ourselves as like capital, partners and co-builders, not necessarily just as allocators. And I think one of the main things that I always like to talk about with GPs is that we don't charge carry at our level. So we encourage our LPs to go around us, so to speak, and invest directly in the funds and invest directly in co-investments as they come up. And to get to know our GPs, to spend time with them, to let their investment areas spark curiosity or interest, because a lot of our existing LPs are high net worth, ultra high net worth individuals and family offices who may have had long-standing experience investing in certain areas, whether that's health tech or supply chain or frontier tech or what have you. And so their interests often, help drive our investment interests as well, because they're sort of relying on us to curate a really great basket of investors and investments that come from that. So I think that relationship, that lack of a wall between the LPs and the GPs is a really important factor in what differentiates Mesa Lane from the others. Obviously, we're, maybe not obviously because I haven't really explained this, but typically Mesa Lane will go in for about 40% of a fund's AUM, or up to that number. So let's say a fund's raising $50 million, we would come in for 20 million of that. And we also promise $2 million, about $2 million to a subsequent fund. So out of the gate, a fund has the opportunity to say, our anchor is in for our second fund as well. As they're going out to market that second fund, that certainly helps catalyze further investment from institutional investors. And then, of course, other folks who might be at the table sort of trying to figure out, does this fund too make sense for us? We're also happy to take calls and share diligence with potential investors, which we've done before for both of our GPs, really sort of doing the operational due diligence and making sure that process is thorough and complete, and then happy to sort of share our findings with folks who are, maybe at the eighth inning. Oh, baseball.
Yeah, let's go.
And how do you facilitate that direct relationship between your managers and the LPs? Like, what do some of those touch points look like, or what processes are in place for them to know what investment opportunities are even on the table?
Right. Yeah. So we have a platform that we use to sort of surface some of those. Using tech obviously helps everybody having a tech stack in place, but we share information, obviously via email. And then we also will set up calls with our fund managers and our LPs ad hoc to sort of get them in front of the entire base. We have a calendar of events we put together. Some of them are dinners, some of them are salon format where GPs can come and give their update in a room full of LPs that may be interested, some prospects, some existing LPs, and really get a feel for, what they're interested in and what they want to do, and then get to know them personally. So a lot of it is really about in-person interaction, but some of it can be, just like this, like having a webinar and inviting all of our LP base to hear directly from our GPs.
Are you finding the LPs actually really do prefer you to just do the work? And are happy to be in the fund of funds and show up at some nice dinners, or are they actively looking at deals and on behalf of managers? It's sort of interesting to know,
right?
Like, is the real partner here Mesa Lane, or in general are LPs really digging in and taking advantage of this service?
Yeah, no, it's by an individual basis, I would say. Yeah. I think, to my point, there's certain people who have been, captains of industry and have done an amazing job in their area of focus, and maybe are on the retirement side of life, but are still very interested, very sharp, very focused on certain technologies, and want to know what's new now and next, and how can I get involved? And they're kind of pounding our door down sometimes trying to figure that out. We want to share content with them. We want them to see our co-investment opportunities as they happen. We want them to be a part of the story. And I would say probably 60% of our LP base is highly motivated and really interested. I'd say like, you know, the other sort of like 30% is willing to hear the information and something sparks their interest and they'll call us back and we'll have a conversation with them. And then, you know, the other, like this 10 or so percent are interested, you know, but they've allocated funding, they trust us and they want to see where this goes. And I think that's an amazing mix because, you know, a lot of the people that we have pulled in as LPs come from Scott and Mark's existing networks. So they know them.
You have a radical transparency and ability to like provide access in your collaboration with fund managers, but that's what they get after. How does that show up in the diligence and getting to know fund managers?
Yeah, great question too. There's an example that I can call back to that's really interesting, where one of our funds was sort of looking at a side letter from an Asian LP who was interested in, you know, taking a significant portion of their fund, but the terms, you know, looked like they could use a little bit of work. And so we said to them, instead of going to your counsel with this side letter and spending a ton of money, let us look at it and let us, you know, take some notes on it and figure it out. This is before we had signed them, by the way. And let us help you sort of with this negotiation process in a sense. We, you know, did the work over about 4 days. And when I say we, I'm really going to put that at Scott's feet. He's a trained attorney, a trained lawyer. And he really worked through the entire process and also sort of helped manage the conversation in a way that considered the delicacy, the importance of this LP, and how the fund manager might, you know, narratively vocalize their concerns with the terms and sort of communicate that in a way that wouldn't scare them away, but would sort of assert their position in the relationship. And they ended up getting an outsized allocation and the terms that they're much more comfortable with after that interaction, and probably saved themselves about $35,000, given the you know counsel that they usually employ. And so I would say that was certainly a catalyzing event towards us gaining their confidence and signing that deal, because through that process you learn so much about somebody. Over the weekend work, doing a favor for someone that you don't have an existing business relationship with yet, you have an LOI with them, and then the success of that interaction coming forward. I think that really shows like how committed we are to helping our GPs, and we're on call for them. Like as those situations come up, it behooves all of us for them to move through those with flying colors, and to sort of, you know, and to learn in the process. I think that's another thing that's really important to me, is watching these really talented adult professionals have vulnerabilities like in their understanding and knowledge of the business, and be able to rely on somebody to give them the straight up advice that they need and the, you know, executable tactics to make it work. That's very vulnerable. It's very scary to like have this huge like GP fund that you're running, and you know there's all this money involved and all these people and all these stakeholders, and you come across a situation where like you don't fully know exactly what you should do in this scenario because you've never encountered it before. You have like some crowdsourced knowledge about it. You might have a friend of a friend or whatever. You're not always sure who to call to get that straight up advice and feel comfortable admitting that you don't know. So being that trusted advisor to our GPs is paramount in this partnership, because we're taking a stake. We're creating a long-term partnership with them, and we better be, you know, ready to sort of help them with these kinds of things. That's table stakes.
Now we're going to take a quick break to speak with our sponsor.
One major topic I would love to talk to you about is the board and equity and founder employment agreements. Can you tell us if you're seeing any tangible shifts there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say the shifts are accelerating. A few things stand out. On the board side, we're seeing more sophisticated governance provisions in founder employment agreements, particularly around removal rights and the interplay between a founder's board seat and their employment status. Investors have learned from many high-profile situations where a founder's entrenchment on the board made it nearly impossible to effectuate a leadership transition, even when the business clearly needed one. So there is more attention being paid up front to make sure that those mechanics are clean and workable. On equity, the biggest shift I'm seeing is toward more nuanced vesting structures. The standard 4-year vest with a 1-year cliff is still the baseline, but there's much more creativity happening around milestone-based vesting, extended vesting schedules for later stage companies, and double trigger acceleration in connection with change of control events. Investors are also getting smarter about clawback provisions, not just for cause terminations, but for situations involving reputational harm or material breaches of fiduciary duty. I will put a side note here, though, that clawback provisions are facing additional scrutiny and legislation in many states, including in California and New York as of 2026. So they shouldn't be implemented without looping in qualified counsel. And on the employment agreement side, there's a general trend, I would say, towards more specificity. Founders and their counsel are negotiating harder on severance terms, good reason definitions, and the scope of restrictive covenants, if any. So the days of a 2-page offer letter serving as a founder's employment agreement at a venture-backed company are largely behind us, I'm happy to say, at least for institutional rounds.
And where do you see the power lying in those negotiations right now?
It's interesting because I always liken it to like getting a prenup at the beginning of the relationship versus trying to negotiate a divorce settlement when everything is gone to pot, right? And so at the very outset, investors, obviously really want to retain their talent and keep their talent. Talent really wants to get compensated for that retention and for their, understandable expertise. And so I feel like what you really need is more diplomacy in terms of drafting that. It's less about who wins and who loses and more about how we move forward and grow this company in a way that can succeed.
Tying vesting to milestones and having longer term horizons sounds so obvious. We're like, yes, these companies now have longer timelines. And we also don't want to just hear how much you've raised. We want to hear how much you've earned.
Exactly.
It's brilliant. So you did mention also with founder entrenchment, that can create problems. Anything you can do to draft around that?
Yeah, so the typical pattern is a founder who holds a board seat by virtue of a stockholder agreement or a charter provision, whose employment is deteriorating, but who cannot be removed from the board without their own consent, right, or a supermajority vote. So this creates a deadlock where the board cannot make a clean leadership transition because the founder is simultaneously the person being managed out and a voting member of the body doing the managing, right? So this is the conflict that we see. So the drafting solution is to decouple the board seat from employment status as much as possible through clear provisions that, for example, specify a founder's board seat terminates automatically on a termination of employment, or that the founder agrees to resign from the board on request of a majority of the non-founder directors. You also want to think about things like voting agreements and consent thresholds that prevent a founder from blocking their own removal. The key, again, is to negotiate these provisions at the time of investment when the relationship is healthy, rather than trying to impose them during a crisis on the back end.
I can see why your VC and founder clients love getting to speak to you. You joined Sidley just a couple years ago. Can you tell us why?
Yeah, so honestly, it was a combination of platform and culture. Sidley is a global firm with extraordinary depth across every practice area that touches my work: M&A, tax, fund formation, litigation, regulatory. When I'm advising a founder or a board, I'm not doing it in a vacuum. I can pick up the phone and get a world-class corporate partner or tax advisor involved in minutes. And everybody is really willing here to pick up the phone and engage with each other on very, very short notice. And that integration makes the advice better. But what really drew me here was the culture. Sidley is a place where people collaborate genuinely, not performatively. The partners I work with across practice groups are invested in getting the right answer for the client, not in protecting turf, which is very unusual and very satisfying. The firm has made a serious commitment to the venture and growth stage ecosystem, which I'm also proud to say I'm a part of. And this is not a side project for Sidley, right? We're building something. And that entrepreneurial energy within a platform of this caliber is so rare. It just felt like the right place to do the best work of my career.
Yeah, I was catching up with a friend who used to be at Sidley, and she's now working for a client. And I thought that spoke volumes that, your clients want you to come work with them 100% of your time.
And now back to our LP interview.
You're now a year in, and you don't have this whole committee of voices that you're having to listen to in terms of manager selection. Between you and the two partners, are there any like preferences you've started to notice that you're like, oh, this is sort of how that I recognize exceptional versus this is how, Scott does? Or I'm curious if you're seeing for yourselves kind of who looks like a Mesa Lane GP.
That's really interesting because I think we are, if you look at a Venn diagram, we're overlapping a lot, but there's areas that we each bring an individual perspective to.
Yeah.
So, one, I really appreciate, the two of them for bringing me into this situation and, sort of allowing me to have a lot of, say in like where these GPs fall in our ranking system or in our pipeline. And, they take obviously my advice really seriously, but there's also times where they challenge it. And I think that's great because there's certain funds or certain structures or strategies that are dicey or could be seen as potentially risky for reasons that, maybe I don't see looking at them from my perspective, or certain strategies that may over time come out of alignment with what we're trying to do with our fund, and sort of having that bigger picture business building perspective again from their further experience is really helpful. But in terms of like either personality or fit or why we like someone, I would say like Scott and I are always very aligned, and Mark often plays bad cop, which we need.
Yeah.
So you can convince Mark that you're doing something great, like, and he'll listen to this and laugh. You are probably doing something great, but in that same sense, like he will listen to and wants to hear the why of why we are so excited about a GP, and that goes back to what I was saying about making sure that you can have a defensible understanding and answer for why you believe in a GP, and I think also giving that GP a chance to show that work.
Are there any aspects of that asset class that they feel should be applied to venture, or that they look for in fund managers?
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean, I can't really speak for them because we haven't delved as deeply into that as even I would love. I'd love to ask them that. I'm going to steal that question and bring it up at this next call with them. But I think what I've heard is like, and I think what everyone is looking for in a sense, and what's actually happening through maybe organic processes, is like a maturation of the industry. And what you're saying about the massive funds that are gobbling up everyone else's deals and everything else in the process is almost like a natural part of how the industry was set up. It doesn't mean it has to be that way, but it's like an organic process that's happening as a result of the industry maturing, funds getting larger, having a longer, lead time, GPs spinning out and starting their own funds, like leaving a partnership at like one of these Tony firms and starting their own fund. That's all very natural and common in hedge funds as well. So I think it's just in a way like venture is just moving in that direction on its own. But I think maybe people who are better equipped or see that earlier may have an advantage in that process by taking steps that would lead them to be successful because of that maturation process. And then some people obviously might make better investment decisions given the knowledge that is happening in the industry. Whether that's like, I know that these X firms that have this sort of strategy are probably not going to survive this industry, or understanding the characteristics of venture that are so specific to it, like co-opetition, for instance. I think that's one big differentiator, is that these deals can only get done if there's several funds involved often, and they need to cooperate with each other even as they're in competition with each other. And what that looks like at a board level, board conversations, contributing to a founder's, strategic advice, panel, all of that is a group effort. It's like a group process. As a company might be winding down or on the verge of it, investors often have calls just amongst themselves to figure out, what can we do here? Like, can you guys write a quick convertible note? Can I, how can we work together to make this happen? That's not typical in hedge funds. And I think that was something that they identified very early on that they're excited about. Like, it's a different game. It's never going to be just like hedge funds, because I think it would die in a sense. Like, it wouldn't be this, it just wouldn't work. Yeah. But there's certain parts of the business that are converging towards that trend.
You gave a cool ad hoc example of, helping out on a term sheet. Do I recall too that there's a whole back office platform for your select GPs? And super curious if AI is sort of integrating its way into
Oh,
the
wow.
model.
Yeah. I mean, that's something that keeps me up at night is AI integration in the back office. But what we're
Yeah.
really offering formally is either at cost or discounted contracts for back office service providers. So whether that's admin, HR, PEO, audit and tax, legal, you name it, we've negotiated, 15 or 20% discounts with our scale to our GPs. So if they need to switch out, their audit and tax folks because they're taking too long with a lot of these things, then we will introduce them and sort of make that happen. If they would like, to switch legal teams, we can make that happen. And they don't have to take our advice or take that offering, but the fact that it exists, I think is really helpful to sort of keep them from getting bogged down in the administrative side of running a fund and allow them to focus primarily on allocation and what size investments they want to make. So that's been really interesting for us. I think there's been, for both of our funds, some support through that process and switching over to, companies that are much better aligned with venture, as a space. I think a lot of people can sometimes get a back office service provider that doesn't have a ton of experience in venture. And so they are offered like a sort of cheaper pricing, but that doesn't always meet out in the end. Sometimes you get what you pay for. So we're helping them meet in the middle, whereas getting a slightly discounted access to really great back office service providers.
We've talked over the years, and as we both have started families. Everybody here on this panel, but I'm curious on like what learnings have you had from that perspective as a parent that has influenced or given you a better perspective on being an investor?
Yeah. I mean, people always say you feel like a different person, sometimes after having a kid, like you're yourself, but it's almost like a different version of you that you never expected. And like you're meeting them for the first time. Like I'm met my son for the first time and met a new version of myself as well, and sort of bore that out over that early postpartum days that I'm sure Alexa remembers fondly. I remember reading emails and I could sort of barely see. I was just still so like bleary-eyed from that process.
The weirdest thing for me was the passage of time. I came in as like busy Slack, go. And
Yeah.
so I was so bored because the babies don't do that much. And then they reset my clock. So by like 2 months in, my husband was like, "How are you sitting here?" And I was like, "I don't know.
Wow.
I have become a Buddha on the mountain."
Yeah. That
See, so that part was weird. That I still can sit for hours, and people are like, "I don't recognize that patience."
Yeah, that I can see now, like meeting you and seeing your personality, I'm like, that is definitely a shift. Like, because and that happens to a lot of people. I think for me, it was like, and this may be for every parent, you can't do everything at once, as much as I want to, and as much as sometimes I need to. I need to take a nap. I also need to fold the laundry and like what's for dinner, and all three of those things can't happen at the same time. But I can do the right things over time, whether that's like making sure, we read that extra book with him at night and making sure like lunch is packed the day before. And it's basic stuff like that. It's like, I often call it like the monastery, like in the kitchen. For me, the kitchen is like my monastery because like whether it's chopping or like cooking or like prepping or doing those things, it helps me sort of reach a certain like flow state. It's very meditative. And so that routine for me is like it's a safe space to land. And it's all for him. Like it's all for his sort of like calm and betterment. But at the end of the day, it's also for me and us in the house. It creates a certain level of structure among the chaos, to your point, that wasn't really there before because it didn't have to be. I could just fly by the seat of my pants all the time. And that's not as cool with a kid. Like it's almost really good idea. You can do it sometimes, but like not all the time. And life is much easier when you have that structure. So I never thought I would say that. And people will probably laugh who know me if they hear this, but like that's what it's been like for me. It's been like a source of calm structure that I didn't think was possible. But with repetition and with that, putting in place those routines, it's been utterly necessary and very positive. I've also gotten better at investing in people who energize me investing my time and not just my money, investing my passion and energy and thoughts, into them. And and at the same time, creating better boundaries to protect
Yes.
myself, right? Like to protect him, my son, to protect myself and in our family, and to protect the outcomes that we all want. Because if you don't have boundaries and you're just bleeding from everywhere and not able to sort of find a place to rest or to start over, or just to say, this is all I can give you and that's kind of it, then you're not giving enough or the proper amount to what you're doing. You know what I mean? I think
Yes.
it's set yourself up for failure. And I've had to learn that. It's the lesson came quickly and rapidly over and over again when I overextended myself. And I'm so grateful for that because the stakes are so high now with another person involved that I'm not willing to mess it up. You know what I mean? It's like a no deal, it's a deal breaker. So I've set some boundaries with people, even with some of this work, and they've been so what's the word? Just so receptive of that.
Yeah.
And appreciative of that, which I didn't expect. I think a lot of people move through life trying to make sure everyone else is happy and thinking if I do this and I do that and I make sure this person has that, then they're going to be, at least I have for a while. You don't realize that once you say to someone, look, I can't do the best job I can with what I have in front of me. I really need to set a boundary here and I'd like to do a better job for you or do less or whatever and hand it off to somebody who could do a better job. They appreciate that. I think that's really important to not overpromise and underdeliver is the headline of my, the new Marcia that I'm meeting now through birth. She's not overpromising and underdelivering.
Speaking of setting boundaries, who do you want to hear from? Who's listening? Who should be on your radar and who's maybe not a fit so they can filter and not waste Marcia's time?
Right, yeah. Basic stats. I mean, we're really looking for emerging managers. So that's realistically Fund 1 through Fund 3. We've spoken to a couple of Fund 3s who had a Fund 1 or 2 that are proof of concept funds, which can mean their size. So that's the next bucket is we're looking at funds between 30 million and 100 million. We'll look at the 25 millions. We'll look at the 125 millions, but our sweet spot is really in that 30 to 100. So if their proof of concept fund was 15, I have a couple ongoing conversations with a few GPs who are in the middle of their first $15 million fund. And when I say send me your updates, I'm fully engaged in watching how you allocate that fund. I want to know so that when Fund 2 comes around, I have enough information to make a good decision. So that's, I'm willing to hear from them, but don't expect investment with a fund that's sub 25 or sub 30. We're also looking in all different sectors. So I had mentioned before that we've invested in a supply chain fund and a robotics, surgical robotics stack focused fund. We're not just looking for specialists, we're also looking at generalists. And we really like to see generalists who have maybe a certain bent towards a couple different technologies, and then they're also open to others, or GP teams that cover broad bases and ended up with a generalist strategy. That's great. I love to see how they put their strategy together for that. So everywhere, I think we're a little bit, I don't want to say crypto averse, but we don't have a full level of expertise on that right now, and so it's hard for us to make those investments. There's the time to understanding of that industry is shorter than we would like. So it's a little bit hard for us, but really everything else is open. We're creating our own sort of generalist fund out of the basket of investors that we're looking at. So I think that sort of helps to draw in a little bit of a boundary around what we're looking at. I'll also add, sorry, that solo GPs are welcome to have conversations. It's just a little bit, the bar is a bit higher. Your point about AI being infused in the back office, I've been super impressed by solo GPs who have built their own tech stack to sort of have a team under them that, is either made of AI or augmented by AI. That's really impressive to me. But keeping up with sourcing, diligence, allocation, and portfolio support is I understand it's very difficult at the solo level. So if there's ways that they've built in to supplant that, I'd love to hear about it and see if, it makes sense for us to further a conversation.
Well, Marcia, it's been truly a pleasure. Always enjoy our conversations and glad that we're able to share your wisdom, your voice, and your analogies to the rest of the world. Thanks for being on.
Thank you guys so much for having me. Take care.
See you later, allocator.
After Portfolio Tile, investing with a smile.